Okay, good day to everyone, and thank you for taking the time out to either join in or view this hangout. We have two very exciting speakers today for the session today. The first is David Amerland, and followed by Debashis Guha. Now, David, for those who have been Google Plus early adopters and regulars, needs no introduction. But for those who haven't yet caught on with him or seen or participated in one of his hangouts on air, in fact, I would say David is virtually an evangelist for hangouts, having written a book as well on how businesses can leverage hangouts. He's a speaker, an analyst, and an author of several books, including a bestseller on semantic search. He writes widely for a variety of publications and blogs, and he has been a SEO consultant, and for many years, and he has been one of the experts on semantic search and how it has evolved over a period and what it means for SEO and for businesses and so on. So, that in a nutshell is about David, and he has been prolific, of course, on Google Plus, and he has been sharing, a lot of his experience and knowledge in posts, in Hangouts, virtually since the start of Google Plus. In fact, I think Google Plus and Hangouts should be very grateful to him for the way he has demonstrated the usage of the platform. Having said that, I just, I'm Raja Mitra from, one of the co-founders of Digital CRM. I'll just take a minute to explain the format that we are planning to follow today. Each of the speakers is going to speak on the designated subject, on the domain that we have spoken about, or we have mentioned for a while. Followed by questions and answers from those participating in the Hangout, as well as any offline questions and answers that we may choose to pick up. And it's going to be likewise for the second session as well. And we estimate the total session to last for about an hour. That's how it is planned. So having said that, I'll not take more time, and I'll hand it over to David for him to start his session. Over to you, David.
Raja, thank you, and it's great to be here, and I've been looking forward to this. I think we're covering a lot of very critical ground in terms of how business is evolving in the 21st century, and in truth, we are entering an entirely new phase. And although the practicalities of a business doesn't change, the way things are done actually does. And we're witnessing something which is fairly profound. As technology gets better and better, as it gets more complicated, as it becomes more responsive, it begins to become invisible. And in a way, it's almost like cars. When we had cars in the past, which were very rudimentary, we had to sort of, instead of a battery, we had to have a manifold, which we used to wound up ourselves, and we used to service them ourselves. And cars today, a modern car hardly breaks down, and if it does, you need an expert to do it because it needs expert tools. So it simply works for you until it doesn't. And technology is the same. And the moment that happens, then what we see is a surfacing of something relatively unique, which is a profound element of where we are, which are the human qualities which drive everything. Now, this is fundamental. We can't have any kind of transactional relationship, no matter what it is, if we don't have a human-to-human connection, a human-to-human understanding, which is predicated on our ability to trust somebody to a certain degree, which always changes. So here we are in a technologically rich society where technology constantly evolves, and search is key to it. And we're talking about human qualities, we're talking about trust and relationships and search and the quality of what we do. So how do we come about to this? Well, essentially, search has gone from becoming a tool to becoming a ubiquitous technology. We can't do anything without using search in some kind of way, whether it's desktop search, whether it is mobile search on a cell phone, or tablet search. And I sort of separate these three because essentially the results which we will get for a largely similar query are different depending on the device. And this is again a profound thing. They're different because we use different devices to actually do different things. Smart search understands that, and it understands intent behind our usage. And to give an example, for instance, if we use just a single word like cakes in search, and it's desktop search, well, it's more likely that we're researching cakes in terms of recipes or nutrition rather than looking for a cake shop from a desktop place. But if you do the same search on your mobile device and you're actually walking, and Google can tell that if you sign to your account by the speed of movement of the GPS, then you're not likely to be looking for recipes as you're walking along. You're more likely looking for cake shops in your area, which will come up as suggestions. And the moment we see this kind of difference, we realize that essentially from an end user point of view, search is becoming not just smart, but responsive. And not just responsive, but practical. So essentially it becomes a utility, which we use hardly without thinking. We use now search by voice in a device. And we also have just very recently, this week as a matter of fact, Google released an app which allows us to handwrite instead of typing. So we don't use a fiddly keyboard. And although it seems like a very smart sort of gimmicky thing to do, it actually will change a lot of things, because the more ways we have of interacting seamlessly with the technology we use, the more the psychology of what we do changes, the more use we'll make of it, the more differentiation will come in all the different things which we do with it. Which brings us basically to what business needs to know about these things. Essentially, search is the interface through which a business connects with its customers. And as a business, businesses used to use search as a tool in itself, which they used to break down because they have to understand processes and they have to sort of find how to actually connect their customers. And that very process-driven approach to how to use search has, in a large part, been deprecated. And now we're looking at things like quality, practicality, trustworthiness, expertise, authority, depth of presence. And these are qualities which are inherent in a real-life situation, or in a real-life business, which you set up somewhere and you really need to establish in order to get any kind of traction in your neighborhood or your community. But to the digital world, they were largely foreign in the way that they actually worked, simply because we didn't have to. We used to a push-button approach, which allowed us to apply certain tools and certain techniques, and then get traffic and use that to try and convert people. So the new domain we're in now, the digital domain, really focuses on the soft qualities and soft skills of a business. Technology allows, through its many facets, and search in particular, establishes things like expertise and authority and trustworthiness. It establishes whether a business is a quality business. It establishes the utility that that business serves to its public in terms of answering questions which they will have, rather than presenting keywords which act as hooks. And then it begins to surface that business to its potential audience. What has changed? Well, some things and everything. Essentially, as we move into the semantic search world more and more, what is of key focus for a business is that the mindset that it actually uses to establish itself in the digital domain has to change completely. It has to change in two ways. First of all, you cannot use search as a graft onto your business. You can't say, well, I've got a business, I've got a website, now I need to do some search engine optimization in order to get some customers. Well, you can't do that. Search is an integral part of your marketing. Your marketing is an integral part of your branding. Your branding is an integral part of your identity. Your identity is your business. If you can't connect these dots successfully in the online world, then the chances are that you're basically taking a lot of wrong steps, which are not providing the results that you expect to see. The other thing on this is that essentially you've got to have data density. And what I mean by that, well, if we go into the offline world example again, pretty much everything that happens offline has a reason. It didn't just happen because it was nice to happen, because that's always expensive in some way, whether it's time or money or effort or all three. So essentially everything that happens happens because it serves some kind of need. You have a door, you put lights in specific ways, you create displays, you light them up in specific ways, you set them up in specific ways, and you go into the extra cost of setting them up again in very specific ways because your audience responds to them. We get into the digital domain in the past, because it was relatively easy to do certain things, we did them anyway because we thought, well, they're pretty cool to do. And pretty cool to do doesn't actually do anything for your public. It doesn't do anything for your audience. They're not there to appreciate a cool website, for instance. They don't want to jump through hoops in order to find what they want. They don't want to have to go through a rigorous process in order to complete a transaction. They should also be able to find exactly what they need about you, your business, and how you do it. And it is these things which, again, haven't always been thought through very carefully. I still see websites, for instance, of large corporations which look like they were designed in 2005 and they're only about 2-3 years old. So that kind of approach simply is usually down to inattention to detail, where we tick a mental box that we need a website and it has to have certain things, and it's not really how it should happen. That is also reflective of the content and the tone of voice we use, the content we create on the web and the tone of voice we use when we actually write that content and connect to our audience. For far too long, too many websites, too many businesses have created a blunt corporate speak language because they thought that's what the audience wanted, that's what convention dictated, that's what everybody else did. And guess what? At the end of the day, a business, any kind of business, is not like any other kind of business. It is unique. And that factor which makes it unique, its own uniqueness factor, barely, if ever, comes across on the web. It hardly ever surfaces when it comes to social media presence, if it has one. For these things to happen, again, the mindset has to change. The business has to think that everything it does in a digital domain has to be driven by the same passion and the same approach to uniqueness that is in the offline domain. And the question always has to be, well, how do we achieve this? What is it we must do in order for our audience to understand that we're really passionate about what we do? We don't just say it. That we really do behave in a certain way. We don't just say it. We really do things up to that level. We don't just say it. And the moment these questions come up and the answers are provided, you begin to get a kind of engagement and interaction with the online world that drives a business forward in terms of reputation, in terms of quality, in terms of social proof, because then its name and its reputation begins to travel outside the very narrow domain of just doing a business with its clientele. That usually allows scaling, which then has a further impact to happen in search, and it allows fresh material to actually connect sometimes through personal search itself, when you get a friend of a friend connection, at other times through social media content which is independently shared and again surfaces through search. So in a nutshell, this is the new domain that we're actually working in the 21st century. There are a lot of challenges within that, not least because the traditional barriers between selling, marketing, and branding and customer service are now non-existent at the business to customer interface. Although within the business itself, usually there's still separate departments that don't talk to each other. So the primary challenge for a business is how to solve these internal problems, how to gain an understanding of itself that is unified. And the larger a business is, the larger the challenge. So if you have 5 employees, perhaps a lot easier to achieve that than if you have 5,000. And if you are a local business, again, it's easier to achieve it than if you're a global business. But the challenge is the same. And the solutions which are applied, whether you're a small business or a large business, are largely similar, but the scaling, obviously, and the depth of application is going to be different. The other issue that comes across this, of course, is that the customer that now everybody's chasing has morphed and changed a lot faster than the business appreciates. Customers are very valuable, they're very empowered, they're very knowledgeable, they do their own research. When they come to a business, they already know about specific things about its reputation, they already have specific questions about its products. They require not a sale to be made to them, but basically an answer to their queries and an establishment of the trust which they are not sure they have. And most businesses miss that opportunity. And again, this is a change of attitude which is brought about by technology. I mean, customers are empowered and valuable and knowledgeable because technology has made it so easy for them to research pretty much anything they need and then approach a business with a different kind of mindset, prepped to a different level than the same customers would have been 10 years ago, which is really, really recent. How businesses handle that at the moment is still very patchy. There's no unified approach for many businesses working across the world. Businesses within the same domain sometimes provide a very different kind of customer experience, and some win and some suffer because of that. So essentially, these are the questions which every business will face. All the questions are relatively fixed. The solutions are not. The market evolves very, very quickly. And the challenge in this regard is the same for a large and a small business. It's how to remain agile, how to remain current, how to remain relevant, and how to find not a customer, because that's really expensive, but your customer. So essentially, the value of any kind of sale is not in selling something to a single person or selling a single unit to a person, even a multiple number of units, because irrespective of the ticket value or the price value of the transaction, it is never enough to justify the cost, and it is never enough to actually provide longevity for the business. Where a business wins is in actually gaining a customer who has a very specific lifespan. So if we're talking about a customer who will be with you for 12 months or 5 years or 10 years, that customer is worth a lot more than somebody who comes in and gets into sort of push-pull affair where they think, oh, I'm paying a lot, but I need it, and then they go away, and that's it. You never see them again. So again, that's a kind of mindset that is changing because of the technology, because of the access to information, which is informing the psychological factors which form the connection between a customer and its business.
Yeah. Well, as I said right at the beginning, David has spoken and written extensively about virtually every aspect about social media, which includes search and SEO and so on. And of course, I think many of you would appreciate the fact that in a HOA or a webinar which has limited time and limited scope, it's not possible to cover many of those areas. So we do hope to have David in a workshop where he does a lot of these all over the world, all the time. So we do hope to have him in a workshop where he can speak much more extensively on some of these domains or subdomains. But having said that, I think we can we can field some questions today on what he has been talking about, which is in fact one of the areas of his specialization, and the subject of a book which, if you haven't read it, I would recommend, because it's a wonderful book, the book on search that David has written. But yeah, so I'll leave it to those of you. I do not yet see any offline questions, so maybe the participants in the room can start off with any queries that they may have. Shubhamoy or Debashis, any queries that you have on whatever David has been speaking about?
Yes, David, let me pose a query.
Okay.
There has been recently talk about how search is changing from individual to social, from Google to Facebook, if you will. Perhaps you can tell us something about how this impacts businesses, or whether it's really the kind of major change that some people have said that it will be.
Okay, that's a good question. Now, there's always been a question from a search point of view whether the things which we will find which are of use to us will actually surface in our social networks as opposed to search, because that's where we're most active. We spend a lot of time there, particularly Facebook, where people spend a lot of their, a huge segment of their online time. And whether the things we find there are of value to us. There are two things to consider here. First of all, any kind of social surfacing of search in that respect is always going to be circumscribed by the limitations of your social group. So if, for instance, you go on Facebook on Facebook, and you have 10 friends. Well, those 10 friends, no matter what they share, are unlikely to share the same depth of material that you would find on search itself when you do your own search queries. Now, but let's say that you actually use Facebook search to find out a lot broader aspects. And again, Facebook search in all its depth, and it has been developing and evolving, is still very problematic. So the sensitivity of it in terms of what it will surface is not as accurate or as responsive to your search queries as it would be if you do, for example, Google search or even Bing, which is another pretty good semantic search engine, at least in the US. I mean, if you get outside the US, unfortunately Bing results get deprecated quite significantly. So from a business point of view now, which is where the pertinent question really is, you have to consider, well, is it worth it for a business which has finite resources to put X amount of money into developing its search presence on Google, for instance, or should it address a social audience that exists in Facebook or Google Plus or even Twitter? Well, from a practical point of view, from a business logic point of view, it is always worth working on search, because that basically uses your own website presence, which you control fairly rigidly. So you know, unless you do anything really wrong or you've made bad choices, your website is really not going to be offline, and your content isn't going to disappear, nor is it going to be circumscribed. And all of these things have actually happened for Facebook, where there are instances where parts of it are inaccessible for whatever reason. Content does get circumscribed in who sees it and when, and sometimes content gets deleted for whatever reason. So that's an area where you don't have any control. So if you're using social to actually market, you're using it primarily for brand awareness and audience reach, and perhaps even audience acquisition, but certainly not sales. And if you're using search itself, it does all those things, but it also addresses sales, because when people go to search, they have a more practical intent. They are looking to solve things at a different point in their journey to purchase. So search is going to give you but definitely a harder impact and a more measurable one in terms of sales than social. And that should be the criteria in terms of how you basically balance your time, your effort, and your money when it comes to promoting content in different verticals. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thanks a lot. Very clear.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Okay, David, let me ask, I hope I'm clearer now, I'm not breaking up too much. Let me ask.
Perfectly clear.
Okay. There's been all this talk about Google, even in its early days, where I think, Larry Page once described Google as an artificial intelligence company. And though it's been built around search, and search is front and center to whatever it does today. Google has also acquired in the recent past a number of companies where they are at the forefront of artificial intelligence, research and work there. And there's been several articles which says, and I think even Larry Page has spoken about this in certain interviews, where he says that eventually search is going to be like a prosthetic brain. It's going to be like an extension of the human brain. And would you like to touch briefly on the implications of this and what this could mean for, say, businesses or institutions and so on?
Definitely. That's a very good question. Essentially, it looks at two things. The moment we say that and we think of search as an artificial intelligence, we think of search doing two things. First, being predictive, which fits in very well with what we're doing here. And a great example of predictive search right now is YouTube, where essentially in your YouTube profile, it looks at your viewing history, it looks at your search patterns, it looks at similar user search patterns and view history, and it preloads videos which you're most likely to actually see. And the correlation of that to the affinity to the user is pretty close on a large majority of the times. So artificial intelligence would actually be predictive in terms of our needs, and Google Now is a very classic example of that. And the second thing it would do is it would actually be responsive in terms of very specific requirements. Now, how the future of search will develop, one of the suggestions is that essentially we're all going to have personal assistants, and those personal assistants will be able to be programmed either by voice or text or handwriting or whatever, and they'll go off, come back, and they'll give you the answers. They'll say, here are the tickets which you wanted booked, this is this and this is that. And if you challenge them and say, how did you get to that, they will actually be able to give you due diligence. Now, to your question, of course, is how does a business take advantage of that? Well, here's what it is. Essentially, with that kind of technology, that smart, responsive, comprehensive level of search, what becomes of primary value to us are doing business with businesses that actually are high quality and we believe in. So the human-to-human connection suddenly acquires tremendous value the more sophisticated technology actually becomes, because the technology itself becomes largely invisible and fades in the background. So we won't have a huge sense of it. We'll have a huge sense that we're actually connecting with a business directly, even though there will be several deep layers of technology between them and us. Businesses that manage to personalize, humanize their presence, and actually deliver quality at every step of the way, which is quality predicated not by their own desires on how they want to project themselves, but quality on their willingness to basically solve their potential customer problems, issues, or requirements. And that's how quality really needs to be defined. So, if I'm going to spend, 10, 20, 50, 100 bucks, I don't really care to do it with a business that actually has a very flashy website, very professional corporate approach. What I want is a business that will do exactly what I need it to do when I need it to do. And if I can find a business like that, which is responsive to my needs, I suddenly have an emotional connection with that business because it satisfies my requirements. Businesses that get that are already changing internally to become responsive to those needs in terms of their marketing, their customer fulfillment requirements, their customer handling the customer service approach, and certainly their branding. And businesses that still are locked in a traditional 20th century idea that they're going to do this in a top-down approach, they're basically hitting the wrong notes, and they're feeling it in terms of not getting market share, even though they may have customers. Those customers are not loyal, and this is where the perception that customer loyalty is dead comes from very frequently. It comes from that missed connection between a business and the people that actually use it.
Yeah, thank you, David. That I think very well answers the question.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions? Otherwise, I just have a small kind of supplemental question, and then maybe we can get on to the other session. But
I have one question.
Please, yes.
Yeah. So I see search is also a business itself. If you look at Google or Bing, that itself is a business, and we are also talking about trust factor. So how do we connect that? Is trust factor a key element to the success of search business? Because case in point can be Facebook and Google. So whatever data that you are getting captured in Facebook might not be very trustworthy. But other way, if you look at Google, people are willingly giving data to it. So is trust factor going to be a success factor for search business also?
Trust, I'm very glad you brought this question up, because essentially trust is key to anything. It's key to any kind of transactional process. For instance, I don't know you right now, we just met, and I have never really experienced you before. So for me, you're an unknown quantity. The reason that I'm not afraid in any sense of the word or uncertain coming into this kind of relational exchange that we experience right now is because I know Raja and I trust his judgment. And that creates a halo effect which covers you, and vice versa. I mean, you're here for the same reason. You know that, when you say something, I'm not going to attack you, I'm not going to be belligerent, because again, although you may not know me, you do know Raja, whom you trust. And that shows that without trust, we can't really do anything. Now, what we're learning in the digital domain right now is that trust, that very human quality without which nothing can happen, it's actually an element which can be highly computed, and it fluctuates all the time. And there are many, many layers which are assessed all the time in order to determine what the trust value or the trust factor is in a piece of information, in a website, in the personal profile of a person, and in a piece of content that gets shared across the web. So we live in a world of constantly fluctuating trust, where trust is very easy to lose and very difficult to actually gain. We have to do a lot of work to actually do that. That is a huge challenge, not so much to small businesses, because they totally get that. They have traditionally worked in a very trust-rich environment with their customers because they work so closely with them. But the moment a business scales, trust tends to be a more tenuous quantity, simply because large global businesses haven't quite learned yet to work in that way, and it's a challenge for them to retool their services and retool their approach to it. It is going to be critical, absolutely critical. It's going to be critical in terms of search. For instance, when the time comes when we have a personal assistant who goes away, comes back and gives us an answer, if we don't have trust in that answer, we are unlikely to ever use that service with any degree of confidence. In order for us to have trust in that answer, the digital assistant, whoever programs it, whether it's Google or Bing or whoever, has to have an incredibly detailed way of actually determining the truthfulness and the trustworthiness of the information it gives us. So when, for instance, it gives us the cheapest tickets to, to Australia on an airline with a good safety record, we shouldn't have to do all the diligent research ourselves, although we can ask the personal assistant to tell us how we got to that. But we should be able to trust its judgment that it actually went through everything, got the cheapest tickets for us, and the airline isn't going to have any issues flying there. And that's just one example I gave. Whatever we ask it to do, it will have to solve that. Now, I'm not going to hide that this development is really critical to search, and it's still very difficult for search to get it right. It's working on it, it's getting better all the time. We're seeing huge improvements in how trust is calculated in search and how trustworthiness in the results is improving, but we're nowhere near to the scenario I just told you, where you send off your digital assistant and it comes back with information which you're never going to question. But eventually we will get there, and the only way we can get there is through the trust factor. And also businesses working online have to be able to generate trust with their audience, otherwise they won't be able to get anything done.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thanks, David. I think that answers the supplementary question I had also, because it was fairly related to this topic. So if there are no more questions at this juncture, we'll just get on to the next session. And of course, at the end of the next session, we could do some more questions, both on big data as well as search, which David talked about. So I'll just introduce Debashis. Of course, Debashis and I we go back a very long time. In fact, I think we go back to our childhoods when we got to know each other. We went to the same engineering colleges, and of course, after that, we had a long break where Debashis went off to do his master's in the US, and he went on to do a PhD in operations research, and he has been working in the areas of finance, machine learning, and so on. Spent a long time in the US, spent some time in academia, and he has been in India for now about 4 to 5 years, working on some of these things, particularly in the financial sector, where he's been working on machine learning and deep learning and so on. So, having said that, I will hand it over to Debashis to start off his session on big data. If Debashis, if there's you'd like to supplement that introduction with some other details which I may have left out, please do so when you start.
Thank you, Raja. Now I think it should be enough. We will go directly into our topic, which is the disruptive technology of big data and how that is going to affect businesses. When I first saw it, and I discussed this with Raja, I had this reaction that big data is more than just disruptive. It is what I would call transformative. By that I mean that big data is a technology that is going to totally transform the business landscape, the entire economic landscape that we have lived in until recently. And the reason why it's going to do that is something that we are going to address in the next 15-20 minutes. So let me see if I can get my slides on. Let's see. Just give me a moment. Raja, can you
Yeah,
see
we
my
can see
slides?
them. Yeah, that's right. We
Okay.
can see them.
Okay. So
Yeah.
we'll start with the basics. What is it? This thing that we call big data, and the usual description is in terms of 4 V's, 4 V words that categorize and describe. One is, of course, the first one, the most important one is volume. That is to say, it is large amounts of data. We're talking about petabytes, exabytes of data. Also, it is velocity. That is usually and often big data is something that's streaming data. Data that comes out of web traffic, data that comes out of tracking vehicles in real time, data that comes out of telescopes that are looking out on the sky, and that is all big data. And one of the largest sources of big data, for instance, are particle accelerators in physics, which produce a lot of data. The third characteristic is veracity, by which we mean that this data, because it's streaming and because of its size, there is not enough time to vet it, to find out if all of it is trustworthy, as we just talked about. And sometimes you got to take it as it comes along without really verifying all of it. And lastly, it's in terms of variety. That is, it is not just data that is numbers. We tend to think of data as being composed of numbers, but big data can be numbers, it can be text, it can be video, it can be audio, it can be many different things. And for instance, a lot of the data that comes from surveillance, and we have a lot of it now, is of course video. So all of this together define what big data is. But what we are really interested in is not just the data itself, but what we can do with it. And for that, what we need to do with it is to look at the data, and it comes from many different databases, many different sources, and much of it is event-driven in real time. What we need to do with it is essentially some classical varieties of statistics: regression, classification, clustering, and all of those things. And that some of the things that we use are map reduce, because all of this data will not fit into the memory of computers, so you need parallel processing. We are not going to spend too much time on the technical aspects of big data. I just throw this up to let you look at what are the possibilities of what can we do with it. And what we do with it is that given this data, we can find patterns in it, we can find clusters in it, and given those clusters, given those patterns, we can maybe find out what is of interest to us in making certain decisions. In other words, what we need to do is, given all this data, we need to have some methods of using it to make better decisions. And this is where big data becomes a transforming technology, because it applies not just to marketing and sales, where people usually think of it, but it across all industries in many different functions. For instance, one of the first uses of data analytics, and one that has been popularized a lot, is in the field of sports. Some of you may have seen the movie Moneyball, which is all about data analytics and how one manager who believed in data analytics changed the face of baseball and how baseball managers approach their job. Same thing is now true of other business areas, such as, of course, retail, and many other areas, such as in production, for instance, in shop floor production. The monitoring, most of production now is done by robots. They produce a lot of data. This data is used to keep track of what's going on, if things are working right, and when to take a line down to fix it, and so on. So what we need now is to figure out why this is such a big deal and whether it is such a big deal. And it turns out that big data belongs to a class of technologies which economists have studied, and they have given the name, let me just put it up, transforming technology to, it's very difficult. Okay, I'm going to just
quick ways to share the screen. Do the screen share for wherever you may have your slides.
Yeah, I'm going to just leave this one. General purpose technologies that, if you look at the bottom of the slide, some examples are major changes in the way human society was organized: agriculture, factory production, combustion engines, computers. These are technologies that are generic technologies, by which we mean that it can apply to many different sectors, many industries, and it is adopted in different contexts. Every time it is adopted, it gets changed, it gets improved, and leads to a lot of new innovation. And it changes the organization of work. If you think of, for instance, factory production, it totally, what we had before was craft production. So one or a few people working in a craftwork type of setting. From there, we went to a factory production where the production process was designed to put together a lot of different parts and mass produce items. And it changed the management of firms, it changed requirements, it changed everything. Does big data satisfy these conditions? And we can quickly see that it does, in fact. Because big data, what is big data? As we saw, it is a lot of data that has been gathered, that is streaming data, and that can be used to find patterns that aid in our decision making. From the description of it, it's very clear that this is something that is used everywhere, because everywhere we need evidence-based reasoning, we need to make decisions, and we need to make decisions that are soundly based on available evidence. And therefore, in fact, we find that big data and big data analytics is being now used in very, very diverse areas, in production processing, in retail, in sports, in newscasts, in politics, everywhere. And everywhere it is adopted, people work on it to suit their own needs. Sometimes the data is not that big, and classical methods can still be used. Sometimes the data is so huge that you need radically new methods to deal with it. And it has already led to many, many different innovations in decision technologies and in management. So this is what we mean by what it is. It's a transforming technology, and it is something that is going to change everything that we know of in the economic landscape. For instance, I've given you an example here of how big data analytics is being used in its home field, so to say, of sales and marketing. The primitives of sales and marketing are lead generation, advertising, and then record entry and record processing. These are the tasks of the operational level of the enterprise. This operational level is held together by an administrative level that produces the sales scripts, the placement scripts, and the processing and the management of sales records. These two levels have already been impacted substantially by computers and by data processing. Much of lead generation has moved online. Obviously, much of advertising has moved online. And of course, pretty much all record keeping now is online. The next step came more recently where the rules that govern the use of these primitives became scripted and analytical and computerized. And we have now in many organizations scripts that are followed by sales representatives and are automated scripts. In addition, there are online placement scripts, record management scripts. However, the next step has not. Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay,
We can.
came back. I think I lost the feed. The next step is to extract meaning from data, and this is the step of data analytics. And this step traditionally has been held by middle management, where they process the data, and based on the data, there is a feedback loop where they guide and direct the operational and the administrative levels. Up to recent times, and perhaps even today, almost all middle management was not automated. None of it is automated. And much of it was not rule bound. It was essentially guided by intuition, seat of the pants kind of thinking. There were some rules that have been generated, but most of it was based on the individual judgment of the managers that are doing the job. This worked reasonably well. However, we know from scientific studies in many different disciplines that data-based, data-driven, rule-based reasoning can outperform experts in many different fields. For instance, we know that the IBM computer Deep Blue beat Garry Kasparov, who was the greatest chess player ever, and it can beat pretty much any chess player anywhere. IBM's Watson beat the best Jeopardy player, and this has been tested in many different fields, in medical diagnostics, in many other fields, that data-based, hard evidence-based, rules-based reasoning does a much better job of decision making than experts' value judgments. This is where big data comes in and changes everything, because data that can, our sales efforts should be concentrated, whether things are working, whether a production line is about to break down and they need to be fixed, whether certain strategies in sports do really work. All these questions that were once the mainly addressed by seat of the pants reasoning, folk wisdom, but not by database reasoning, because first of all the data wasn't available, and secondly, even if some data was available, the procedures and the methodologies to actually apply this data to decision making was not available. that has changed, and that is going to change more and more. Big data and data analytics has come in a big way only for a few years. 2015 is really the dawn of big data, and in perhaps 5 to 10 years we will see that large amounts of inroads that big data will make into the corporate and the business world. And this will be true not only of large organizations which can afford their own in-house big data analytics teams, but also for small and medium enterprises which probably will have to outsource their application of big data analytics. But it is certainly going to be the case that in the future all businesses will be data driven. Middle management and the management of the enterprise, except for the strategy making, is going to be entirely data driven, and perhaps in some cases even automated. And businesses that fail to make this switch and are bound to old ways of doing things are simply not going to be able to compete in this new world. Even at the top of the enterprise where strategy is formulated, big data is already making inroads, and it will continue to make inroads because again, decision making in any form needs evidence. This evidence is now coming in, and there are methods of processing this information. For instance, one classical method of strategy is scenario planning. You define certain scenarios, and for each scenario, future scenario, you define how your enterprise is going to react to it and what you can do to change it. This is a very data intensive. It used to be something that you just draw on a chart and you brainstorm, but now that has changed. Big data can throw up interesting practical scenarios for top management to work on, and that has completely changed the scenario planning approach to strategy. And more, I think we will see that the entire end-to-end business processes are going to be much more data-driven, much more analytically driven than they ever were. And every business will have to change their way of doing things in order to take into account this massive sea change that we are going to see, and we are beginning to see right now. Thank you. I think that should be, we will go to questions now.
Sure. Thanks, Debashis. That was, I think, a pretty insightful talk about where big data is going to lead to, and what disruptive, or as you call it, transformational technologies will impact and businesses. So, I'll lead off with a question before the others. This is taking off from how it's going to impact businesses, and I think there have been several studies which show, and as you also pointed out, that a lot of possibly middle management in many organizations, in corporations, is going to get flattened out as a result of this, because the utility of middle management, a person there who's kind of making decisions based on what you call quote unquote experience, or sit of the pants judgment and so on, is going to be far less useful than a decision based on analytics and big data analytics. So I think this is going to lead to not only many jobs getting lost and many jobs disappearing over a period of time, but middle management in many corporations feeling the pinch and virtually kind of becoming redundant in many ways as a result of these kind of technologies.
Yes, that's a very good question, and I think a lot of people are worried about not just big data, but in general, automation leading to loss of jobs across the board, and it is already happening. However, most studies seem to suggest that what we have here is not really an overall job loss, but a structural change where certain types of jobs are replaced by certain other types of jobs. This will be true, I'm sure, in the application of big data to middle management. There is absolutely no question that there is going to be a lot of job losses in middle management ranks, because it's simply not true that middle management can outperform data-based automated reasoning in all cases. In some cases, with a data-based automated backup, perhaps they can do a very good job. But nevertheless, because of the flattening of structure, there will be a lot of middle management weeding out. However, there is, and it is true now, going to be a huge growing demand for data scientists. It is already happening. There's a huge shortfall in supply of data scientists, and this is just going to get bigger and bigger. And I think soon, learning at least not the technical parts of data science, but the use of data science in easy to use, user-friendly software patterns is going to be a must for people who want to be in middle management. In other words, just as it is unthinkable for someone who does not know how to use a computer or a smartphone to really operate in today's society, the same thing will be true of big data. So there will be a lot of effort going into making these features available to you on your laptops, your tablets, your smartphones, so that you can work with the support of big data. And there will also be a lot of retraining to be done by managers and even by frontline personnel to use big data and to interact with big data and analytics to do their job better. So in short, in answer to your question, yes, there is going to be a lot of job losses in middle management ranks, but perhaps that's going to be more than offset by job creations in other parts of the economy.
Thanks, Debashis. I think that answers my question very well. I leave it to you. David, in fact, a lot of semantic search or smart search, as we may call it, is essentially application of, it's a big data application, right? So,
certainly, yeah. Search as it exists now is essentially a big data problem, which is governed by the same 4 V's that Debashis explained. The slight difference, perhaps, is that the defining factor of relevancy is decided at an interface governed by machine learning that interacts with a human person. But to get back to Debashis' presentation, I loved the entire thing, and I think it's absolutely right. A lot of businesses are moving into big data applications because they do give a competitive advantage. There always has to be a human element at the moment which decides where the baseline starts. Because when you have masses and masses of data, which you never had before, it becomes very easy to get into a decision-making paralysis simply because you don't know what to prioritize, where the important things lie, which direction you should follow. And these are again shaped by the human element. It's designed by the basic questions. What is the business there to achieve? What's the best way to do that? How does it reflect and project its qualities that differentiate it from other businesses? So big data is a tool, like search is a tool, which as we move forward will become more and more integrated and more invisible in many ways in the decision-making process. And the human element, to some extent, will play a critical role in the guidance of that.
Yeah, thanks, David, and thanks, Debashis. Subhamoy, any queries for any of the speakers?
Yeah, I mean, I have one observation or question. You may say, big data that way is relevant for big companies, but what about small companies? Is it really a problem for a small company, or is it only a solution for the big companies?
Right now, I think the ecosystem has not developed sufficiently for small and medium enterprises to really use big data in a significant way. Most of the work done is in-house. You cannot even actually get access to data sets because most of them are proprietary. Most of the technology is also large-scale technology. However, this is going to change. If you think of, for instance, another revolution, the computer revolution, all computers were for big companies mostly, right? We used to have only mainframes, which only large organizations could afford, and small businesses mostly didn't even know what a computer was. That has changed. Now we can have, a one-man operation can have fully automated setup. Pretty soon, I think you can have, a guy on the street, vendor selling hot dogs, probably have search and big data analytics on his smartphone. And he can probably, change his hot dog recipe, referring to people that are approaching his cart. This facility is going to be available, and I think it's going to be available very soon. When I say very soon, I don't mean months, but very soon in terms of years. And small and medium enterprises, just as much as large enterprises, are going to be very much plugged into big data and analytics. And in fact, they are not going to be able to survive in the competitive landscape without big data and analytics helping them everywhere, at every point. So right now, I think it is true that there isn't enough technology is not available sufficiently widely, but I think that is just a matter of time. I think it's going to change very soon, and apps will be available on your smartphone, and data sets will be available, and you can probably generate a lot of big data simply using handheld devices and possibly your website, your social media presence, and all this data can be analyzed using apps that will be available to you on the cloud 24 hours a day. And I would guess it's only a matter of 4 to 5 years before this is widely available.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Debashis. Yeah, okay. Maybe one other question from my end is that I think see, there's a strong feeling in even with large corporations. Maybe this is more so in Asia. And when I say Asia, this includes Southeast Asia, this includes India, maybe Asia Pacific, to a great extent, where when you talk about, say, the application or the utility of disruptive technologies or transformative technologies of the kind that we have you and David have been talking about today, one of the first reactions is saying that, hey, this is something which the big boys in the US, for example, this is for the Googles and the Facebooks and the Amazons and maybe for the Citibanks and the big insurance companies and the big non-banking finance companies and so on and so forth. It's not for me. We like I think somebody said, I do not either have access to that volume of internal or external data. I do not have the setup. I do not have the infrastructure. And then there's often a question of cost benefit which comes in, saying that, look, by the time I get all that into place and I get the people in place, I build up the infrastructure, I build up the ecosystems necessary, is it going to be beneficial? Because we have done all right so far in the way we have been taking decisions and so on. So I'd like your reactions to that kind of that proposition which a lot of even senior managers seem to come up with.
Yes, certainly I think this is going to be the dominant reaction, the most majority reaction, or perhaps even 90% of the people that you speak to probably are going to have this reaction, especially in a place like India. And I think that this is true not just in India, but even in the US or Europe. The use of big data still is limited to mainly to large corporations. The technologies are not widely available. The data is not widely available. So I'll give you another very simple example. Suppose you wanted to demonstrate the utility of big data to a company. Uh, Suppose you would want to show them how it all works. It's difficult to even show people how it works because the data sets that are used in big data are almost all proprietary and nobody's going to share it with you. So you can't even demonstrate your product to people who probably might benefit from it. However, I think that this is short-term thinking. I think it is true that in the next year, you're not going to be put out of business because you didn't apply big data analytics to your marketing problems. However, that is going to change very soon. It's already changing in certain areas. For instance, in retail, which is been traditionally one of the first fields to employ and deploy big data analytics, it has already changed on the ground in India. The big box retail stores that came up a few years ago are starting to lose ground to the online stores because the online stores not only are more convenient for certain classes of people, but they have much better data capture and data analytics. And this is true even in the US, for instance. Walmart used to be the leader in deployment of technology and in fact did outdo the classical big box stores like Sears. Walmart is now falling behind Amazon because Amazon has much better data capture uh, and if you think of the companies that are using big data in India today, some of them at least are not really large companies. They are online startups. This trend is only going to get steeper with time. And because the time taken to put together a team and to effectively utilize big data for your organization is not inconsiderable. I mean, we're talking about maybe a year, 2 years before you start to see the dividends out of it. People need to act now because in 2 to 3 years, if you are competing in India, and of course in India you will be competing with the big boys. If you're in selling furniture in India, then pretty soon you'll be competing with IKEA. If you're selling books in India, you are already competing with Amazon. So you need to employ best practices with regard to big data and analytics and data and evidence-based decision making, and you need to get started right away because otherwise it's going to be too late.
Thanks, Debashis. I would just ask David also, because David does consulting and he speaks to a lot of corporations all across. He's very, very global. He does this in Singapore, he does this in China, he does this in Shanghai, he does this in Europe, in UK, and he does this in the US. So I would like your thoughts and insights on this whole aspect, and particularly maybe with reference to organizations or corporations in Asia.
Well, I loved your question. There's a couple of things to bear in mind. First of all, the application of big data in the decision-making process represents a significant change in internal structure for any kind of business, as well as the application of how they gather data outside the business. Now, the application, how this is actually put into place will get easier and less painful than what it is right now. So it won't be as costly as it is perceived. Already, IBM is making Watson available as an app to a specific at the moment the medical profession, but there'll be similar applications in future for many other things. And we have the Internet of Things on the back of this, which will make things easier. Now, it's good to bear in mind that change in any kind of organization only happens when they feel they have to, rather than when they should. So Debashis said quite rightly that businesses should start thinking now in order to be ahead of the game. But from experience, I know that really they will only start moving towards that direction when they actually sense that they're losing market share, or they're losing sales, or they're falling behind their competitors significantly, and now they need to narrow the gap. So as long as they feel that Amazon is doing okay because it's big, and they're not as big, and that's where they attribute the change, they're not really highly motivated to change their internal workings. If they start realizing that Amazon is gaining more and more of a lead because it does things smarter rather than just working harder, and that allows margins of profit to be created, which make it more profitable for the same amount of work, then they will follow suit. Now, the moment that happens, essentially the question is what kind of data should you apply and how should you apply it, and is it only for the big boys? And when it comes to big data, there are two sources of data you can have, or two types rather. You can have depth or you can have breadth. Sometimes big businesses go for depth because they require massive amount of data from very specific sectors, but smaller enterprises really need what we would call small data at scale. And I love the example Debashis gave about the hot dog seller, which it's about as small as it gets. If he has data at his fingertips, it's allowing him to basically predict peak times for him, and be prepared so he actually serves customers faster. If he has data at his fingertips where it's allowing him to perhaps predict the behavior of the people around him in sort of affected by the weather patterns, that again allows him to become more profitable. And essentially he's only doing the same thing he always has done. There's not a massive amount of extra work related to that, but it's working smarter. And when he realizes that, then the profit increases incrementally, margins get better for the same amount of work, and it makes sense to actually move in that direction. Getting that message across to a business really entails a dialogue. So, if it comes to discussing it with a particular enterprise, you need to be able to speak their language and also understand the challenges they face in the sector which they face in order for them to see what they should be doing and plan ahead. And that's not always easy to do. In many of the situations where I come in, I usually enter when they have felt the absolute need to basically change, and then they start the internal dialogue, and that's the reality of it. So it's probably, I would say, 1 time out of 10 when there's a business forward-thinking enough to think, oh, let's start thinking about this now because it's coming. So there you go.
Very true, David. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think people only start thinking of a change and start thinking of ways of newer ways of doing things when they start feeling the pinch. And till such time that they feel the pinch, people just go on and say, listen, everything is fine. Business is good. I mean, why should I get into all this? This is uncharted territory for me.
Exactly.
I also an observation. We had a hangout sometime back with a person called Abhijit Sanyal. Now Abhijit is I would say one of the foremost exponents of predictive analytics. I mean, he's been at it virtually since predictive analytics was born, I think, in some form or the other. He's based out of Boston in the US, and I think till date he must have done about maybe over 100 or projects as a consultant or as part of a team and so on in predictive analytics. And one of his observations, even for the US market, was that the problem often in many cases is that the concerned manager or the senior manager is unable to exactly define the problem. I mean, if you're wanting an answer to something, you first need to identify or define the problem. And that often is a very is a very nebulous area, or is a very difficult area, because people are so straitjacketed by conventional thinking or the classical way of doing things that they'll give you ready answers saying like, oh, my market is bad because I have growing competition here and my price is not right and my my branding has suffered and my positioning is not right and stuff like that, and they would not be able to go beyond that in defining what really the problem is, because they, while defining the problem, they provide theoretical or seat of the pant answers to those problems which may not be right at all. So do you see this as also an area where often maybe they need some help or some guidance of sorts in being able to define the problem?
Yes, absolutely. It happens every time, and it's human nature. And usually what happens is, I get to a business which happens to be in Europe or in the States or in Asia, and they'll tell me what they haven't got and how easier it is for the other guys to have because they have it. And case in point, I was in Sofia in Bulgaria just about 10 days ago, and they were discussing how difficult the economic climate is there. And because there's a lot of bureaucracy if you want to set up a business, and it makes it really hard for them to do that. And that's never the problem, because if that's the case, and in that particular case it is very difficult to actually set up a business, you also have a lot fewer competitors than you would in any other market, because it's so difficult to actually set it up in the first place. So really, every place has peculiarities which come from with the environment. In some places it's very easy to set up a business, so everybody does. So then you have tremendous competition, and it's really difficult to actually get anywhere. And there you'll say, well, I have too many competitors. I need to go to Bulgaria where there are fewer people. So it's always a case of creating context in terms of the problem, and then stepping back and looking at the dynamic involved. Usually what happens when a business looks at a particular problem they have, the problem they're looking at is never really the problem. They're always underlying factors. And it's a case of peeling back the layers a little bit to get to the underlying factors which have created that problem in the first place. And then you begin to actually put in place solutions which will work in a sustainable manner. If you don't do that, then what happens is solutions that are suggested are just a band-aid. They address the symptoms but not the cause. So there'll be another problem surfacing a bit later on, caused by the same underlying conditions. So a little bit of analysis is always called for. And usually, at least in my case, being an outsider to a business, this is the perspective which I provide, which is of value to them, because I'm not so close to the business that I see the day-to-day issues. I can create the distance necessary to actually help them peel back the layers.
Thank you, David. I think those are wonderful observations. If there are no more questions, we'll move towards concluding and rounding up this session. But are there any last questions that any of you would like to pose?
Not particularly. I'd just like to say that I thought it was fantastic in terms of and on the back of everything he said, there is a high degree of roboticization of business coming in, automation essentially, which is to be quite an interesting world.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right. So I think in the time constraints and given the fact that these are vast topics which cannot be covered in a hangout or even several hangouts, because these are kind of courses people do, credit courses for a semester in many of these subjects. But having said that, I think a tremendous to both to Debashis for within these constraints sharing as well as a lot of information. These kind of transformative technologies are going, and I said, a few who are possibly interested in the subject and would like to kind of dive into it deeper, we do plan to conduct workshops in the near future on some of these aspects, and you could look out for those. And so having said that, I think again with a note of thanks to both the speakers, David Amerland and Debashis Guha, I'll conclude this HOA for today. Thank you, everyone, for.
All right. All right.
Take care.
Thank you.